Welcome, curious minds, to another deep dive. Today, we're tackling a really fascinating story, one that's been around for centuries.
That's right.
It's the legend of Spanish treasure, supposedly buried up on Neahkahnie Mountain in Oregon. You know, steep slopes, stormy coasts.
Right. It's got all the ingredients for a great mystery. And there's a, pretty dark twist to it as well.
Absolutely. So our mission today is to really dig into this. We've got some great sources, and we want to unpack the details, try to figure out what's history and what's, maybe more folklore.
See what might actually be hidden up there in the Mountain of a Thousand Holes, as they call it.
And the sources are quite varied, aren't they? We're looking at indigenous oral histories, accounts from early European explorers.
Yeah, Spanish shipping records too, and even some really modern science stuff like X-ray fluorescence testing, which is pretty cool.
It really is. It helps identify where materials actually came from based on their elemental makeup.
Exactly. So we'll explore who might have buried this stuff, if anyone did. We'll look at some popular theories, maybe debunk one or two.
Including one about a very, very famous English pirate, or privateer, I should say.
Oh yeah, that one. And hopefully we'll land on the most plausible explanation, which, maybe surprisingly, leads to something quite human, quite poignant.
Okay, so let's start with the place itself, Neahkahnie Mountain. It's on the northern Oregon coast. Not a massive mountain, maybe 500 meters.
Yeah, about that. More of a big headland right on the coast. But it definitely dominates the view there, gives you that kind of dramatic feel.
And the core legend, it really comes from the Tillamook people's oral tradition, doesn't it?
It does. The story goes, sometime in the 1600s, the Spanish ship shows up, anchors in Nehalem Bay, right down below the mountain.
Okay.
Then some men row ashore. They're carrying this really heavy chest. They haul it up the mountain, dig a deep hole, put the chest in, and then, well, this is the grim part. They supposedly kill an African slave who was with them and put his body on top of the chest.
Wow, as a deterrent.
As a deterrent, yeah. To scare anyone off from digging it up. Then they just sailed away. And the key part is, the Tillamook reportedly watched this whole thing happen.
That is chilling. And you can see how a story like that would just take root.
Absolutely. And it led directly to the mountain getting that nickname, the Mountain of a Thousand Holes.
Yeah.
Because people just haven't stopped digging for centuries, sometimes with, heavy machinery even.
Trying to find that chest.
Trying to find the chest. But here's the thing. No valuable finds have ever been officially recorded. Nothing.
And people sometimes talk about clues, like markings on stones.
Yeah, but those are pretty much, there's no real basis for them. People see what they want to see, I think. It doesn't really hold water.
Okay, so if the Tillamook story has some truth to it, who were these guys? When did Europeans even start coming to that part of the coast?
Well, the story itself was first told to English-speaking explorers and settlers. Captain Cook was there in 1778. He wasn't looking for treasure, mind you. He wanted the Northwest Passage.
Right, but he found the sea otter trade instead. Very lucrative.
Very lucrative indeed. And then, within maybe 20 years or so, you start getting American settlers. John Jacob Astor set up his trading post in Astoria in 1811.
So it's around that time, late 1700s, early 1800s, that the Tillamook share the story.
Exactly. But here's an interesting point. The Spanish were actually there before Cook. Juan Perez sailed up the coast in 1774.
Ah, okay. So did the Spanish record anything about burying a chest?
No, that's the thing. Our sources are clear. You don't find this story anywhere in Spanish accounts from the time. It doesn't seem to be their story, if you see what I mean.
So if it wasn't the Spanish writing about it, and it happened supposedly in the 1600s, who else could it have been?
Well, that's the historical blank spot. Before 1774, there were just no known records of any European ships reaching the Oregon coast. These voyages were huge deals, national investments. They were documented.
So history gives us nobody.
Pretty much no clear candidates from the official records for who might have buried a chest in the 1600s.
Which naturally leads people to think pirates. Buried treasure always makes you think of pirates, right?
It does. But the Pacific wasn't exactly pirate central, not like the Caribbean, the Spanish Main.
Why not?
Several reasons, really. First, just getting there was incredibly hard. You had to go around Cape Horn, which is notoriously dangerous.
Okay.
Second, there just wasn't much to pirate in the Pacific back then. No major trade routes crisscrossing the ocean, like in the Atlantic. Not many merchant ships. Hardly any settlements to raid along that whole vast coast.
Not target rich, then.
Not at all. And third, the few Spanish ports that did exist on the west coast of the Americas were heavily fortified. No safe place for pirates to hang out or sell their loot.
So standard pirates seem unlikely. But there's this specific theory, popular in Oregon, about Sir Francis Drake.
Ah, yes, Drake, the famous English privateer. The theory goes that he landed on the Oregon coast in 1579, specifically Cape Aroga.
And if he landed there, maybe he buried something.
That's the idea some people hold. It's quite a persistent local belief.
But is there any truth to it?
Honestly, not really. The sources we looked at show this claim seems to trace back to a misinterpretation. Apparently, a civic group in Coos Bay read something Drake's chaplain wrote about sand dunes looking like snow and decided it must mean the Oregon dunes near Cape Arago. But there's just no actual evidence for it. An obscure article from 1975 pushed it, but it's described as not even remotely factual.
So where did Drake actually land? Because we do know, right?
Oh, we know quite definitively. All the credible evidence points to Drake's Bay on Point Reyes, which is north of San Francisco, quite a way south of Oregon.
Okay.
He beached his ship, the Golden Hind, there for about 5 weeks in the summer of 1579, June 17th to July 23rd, specifically. He needed to repair it before sailing across the Pacific to complete his circumnavigation.
And there's evidence.
Tons of evidence. His chaplain, Fletcher, wrote detailed accounts. They interacted with the local Native Americans who've been identified as the Coast Miwok people based on linguistic and anthropological data.
And from the physical evidence.
That's where it gets really solid. Archaeologists found pieces of European porcelain ceramics in Drake's Estero that's a little estuary off the bay. And in 2013, they used that X-ray fluorescence testing.
The technique we mentioned earlier.
Exactly. And it proved definitively that the chemical signature of that porcelain matched porcelain known to be carried on the Golden Hind.
Wow. So that really clinches it.
It does. The U.S. Department of the Interior, most scholars, they all recognize Drake's Estero as the spot. Drake even named the area Nova Albion, New England.
So the idea that he was at Cape Arago in Oregon
just doesn't add up. He sailed 350 nautical miles south from Cape Arago to get to Point Reyes. Why would he bypass loads of perfectly good spots to fix his ship in Oregon just to go all the way down there? It makes no sense.
Okay. So Drake is out. The Golden Hind was not the ship at Neahkahnie Mountain.
Definitely not.
All right. So if it wasn't pirates, wasn't Drake. What's the most likely explanation according to our sources?
The Manila galleons. This is where the story starts to align with some hard facts.
Tell us about those. What were the Manila galleons?
Okay, so starting way back in the 1500s, Spain ran this incredibly long-lasting trade route. Huge ships called galleons sailed between Manila in the Philippines and Acapulco in Mexico.
Right across the Pacific.
Exactly. They'd sail north from Manila to catch the westerly winds, cross the North Pacific, and then sail south along the North American coast down to Acapulco.
Did they usually stop in Oregon?
No. Typically, they stayed way offshore until they got much further south, like around Baja, California. There are 0 records of any Manila galleon planning to stop in Oregon.
Planning to stop, but accidents happen.
Accidents definitely happen, and Spanish records show only 2 Manila galleons were known to be lost on that northern part of the route. One in 1693, another in 1705.
And those dates?
They fit perfectly with the 1600s time frame from the Tillamook oral tradition.
Okay, now that's interesting. Is there actual physical evidence of a shipwreck there?
Oh yes, compelling evidence. Over the years, people have found old ship timbers washing ashore in Nehalem Bay. Shards of blue and white Asian porcelain, like Chinese Ming Dynasty stuff.
Yeah.
And lots and lots of beeswax.
Beeswax? Why beeswax?
It was a common cargo item from the Philippines, used for candles, especially church candles in Mexico. They find it in big blocks, sometimes with Spanish markings. Pieces still wash up today.
Wow.
And intriguingly, some beeswax has been found way up in local canyons inland. This suggests the wreck probably happened before the massive Cascadia earthquake and tsunami in the year 1700.
Because the tsunami could have washed wreckage inland.
Precisely. That event dramatically changed the coastline. And the science backs this up too. They found wings of native Philippine bees embedded in the wax.
Get out. Really?
Yeah. And just recently, in 2022, they analyzed the wood from those timbers found on the beach. It was confirmed as malave,
Which is?
a type of hardwood from the Philippines known for its durability, and it was specifically used to build Manila galleons.
Okay, that's pretty conclusive then. A Manila galleon did wreck there.
Undeniably. Almost certainly the Santa Cristo de Burgos, which was the one lost in 1693.
Right. So we have a wrecked Spanish galleon from the right time period, but does that connect to the buried chest story? Did anyone survive the wreck?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? We don't have direct empirical evidence like finding the chest or definitive proof of burial, but we do have those powerful oral traditions again.
From the local tribes.
Yes. Besides the Tillamook story about the burial, there are accounts from the Clatsop people nearby. A fur trader named Alexander Henry wrote in 1813 that the Clatsop told him they had lots of beeswax from a ship, but that the crew had all been killed by the natives.
All killed. Oh.
But then there's another account, maybe more detailed. Silas B. Smith, who was a descendant of a Clatsop chief, wrote an article in 1899. He shared his people's oral history, which said that actually most of the crew survived the wreck and lived alongside the natives for several months.
Lived with them for months.
Yeah. But the story ends tragically. Smith wrote that the eventual massacre happened because, and this is a direct quote relayed in the sources, the whites disregarded the natives' marital relations.
Meaning?
The sources interpret this, quite frankly, as meaning the Spanish sailors raped local women. It's a really disturbing element, but it's part of the account that's been passed down.
Okay. That's very dark. But it adds another layer if they lived there for months.
Exactly. During that time, before things went terribly wrong, is it plausible that some of the surviving crew members might have wanted to hide something, maybe something valuable to them or something they wanted to protect, like the ship's log, official papers, maybe personal items?
And Neahkahnie Mountain is right there, overlooking the bay where they wrecked.
Precisely. So while we don't have proof of the chest itself, the known shipwreck of the Santa Crista de Burgos in 1693, combined with these compatible Tillamook and Clatsop oral traditions about survivors, a burial, and eventual conflict. Well, it forms the most accepted hypothesis. It connects the dots better than any other theory.
So the Spanish gold, probably not gold.
Highly unlikely on a Manila galleon returning from Manila. They carried goods like silk, spices, porcelain, beeswax. Not typically chests of gold coins heading that way.
But if something is buried up there from those survivors...
It could be, in a way, 1,000 times more valuable than gold, as one source puts it. Not financially, but historically, humanly.
What do you mean?
Imagine finding personal items from that crew. You know, maybe crude carvings they made, desperate letters home they never got to send, religious tokens, things that tell the story of people.
Yeah. Sailors stranded thousands of miles from home, injured, knowing their situation was probably hopeless.
Facing, as the Clatsop story suggests, imminent death after months of this tense coexistence. It transforms the legend, doesn't it? From a sort of cartoonish treasure hunt.
Into something much more real and tragic.
Exactly. It becomes this really poignant chapter, a human story. It speaks to what people do in the most desperate circumstances. And yes, acknowledging that really grim part about the conflict, the sexual violence mentioned in the oral history, is crucial to understanding the whole tragic picture. It's not something to gloss over.
Right. So we started with this wild legend of Spanish gold and a murdered slave.
We looked at the actual history, the lack of early records, debunked the Drake theory.
And landed on a very specific shipwreck, the Santa Crista de Burgos in 1693, backed by archaeological finds and science.
And connected it to the native oral traditions, suggesting survivors might have buried something, likely personal or official items, not treasure, before a tragic end.
So for you listening, what this deep dive really shows is how digging into the context, the history, the different perspectives around a local legend can totally change how you see it.
Yeah, it goes from just a story about buried loot to this incredibly complex human drama. Survival, cultural clashes, desperation, violence.
Yeah.
It makes you think about the people involved. Who were they? What were they facing?
Which leads to maybe a final thought to ponder. If you were in that situation, shipwrecked, far from home, your future looking incredibly bleak, possibly violent, what would you try to save? What piece of knowledge, what object, what message would you try to hide for posterity?
And what does that impulse tell us about ourselves? That need to leave a mark, to protect something meaningful, even when facing the absolute worst.
It's a powerful thought.